Jrue Holiday is a member of the Boston Celtics, ladies and gentlemen. Wow, it is absolutely insane that this Eastern Conference has become an arms race at the top. We had the Damian Lillard trade a few days ago, and now the byproduct of that, the Jrue Holiday trade that sends him to the Boston Celtics, the Milwaukee Bucks rival. This is just absolutely perfect basketball, perfect setup for an awesome season that's headed our way. Let's break it down for you guys really quickly. First and foremost, we obviously saw the Damian Lillard trade that forced Jrue Holiday to Portland. He was immediately rerouted now to the Boston Celtics. There were conversations that the Clippers, the Sixers, the Miami Heat might go out and get him. But in the end of the day, it was the Boston Celtics. And I was kind of curious to see if the Celtics would even get involved in this just because of what it would mean for them to go and acquire a guy like Holiday. They had to trade Robert Williams, they traded Malcolm Brogdon, and they traded 2 first-round picks as well, one of them being unprotected in 2029 in order to acquire Holiday. He's on an expiring contract, but regardless, that doesn't matter much for what the Boston Celtics are trying to do, which is this season win an NBA championship. They now have added Kristaps Porzingis this summer, they've added Jrue Holiday, but they've lost 3 key rotation pieces in Marcus Smart, Robert Williams, Malcolm Brogdon. They're 6th man of the year. It's pretty big news. And it's in all honesty, how it looks for the Boston Celtics is going to be the main thing here for this video. We are going to preview everything Boston Celtics related right here just to see how they stack up for this season going forward. First and foremost, when you think about the Jrue Holiday aspect of this trade, you think about, man, how good that Marcus Smart deal looks right now, because they've sort of replicated what Smart brought to this team as a connector on offense, as a point of attack defender, as a guy who can guard multiple positions. Jrue Holiday can replicate a lot of that. He's able to do a lot of the things Marcus Smart did on defense, and honestly, maybe even a little bit better. If we're just comparing their last seasons, Marcus Smart had a little bit of a down year defensively, whereas Jrue Holiday was obviously an all defense level player. I think ultimately when you have Derek White and Jrue Holiday, you have one of the best perimeter defenses basketball has to offer. Then you have Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, 2 guys who are adept defensively as well. You add guys like Al Horford and Kristaps Porzingis to that. That is a very, very good defensive nucleus. It is actually sort of the opposite of what the Milwaukee Bucks are, which is, you know, they've lost a lot of defense by getting rid of Jrue Holiday. Now they're sort of relying on being more of a dynamic offensive team. So it's interesting to see the kind of difference between these two teams at the top of the Eastern Conference and how they sort of stack up together. Focusing in on the Celtics, you look at what Jrue Holiday can offer. It's a bit of versatility. It's being a little bit more unique in their approach. And people will, you know, point to Jrue Holiday's struggles in the playoffs, his inefficiency for the Milwaukee Bucks, the fact that he has kind of gone ghost in a couple of playoff series for Milwaukee as well. But I will bring this up. Jrue was sort of punching above his weight in Milwaukee. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I mean that in the sense that he was being asked to do a little bit too much offensively because of how deprived Milwaukee was as a half-court offense. They were asking him to be the lead ball handler. They were asking him to shoot and score more than probably he has since he was on the Sixers. And ultimately, I think that was probably asking him to do a little bit too much offensively. When you bring him to Boston and you have Tatum, you have Brown, guys who are going to carry the load, carry the usage offensively pretty much every single night. You have guys like Kristaps Porzingis, who's a weapon and a shooter. You have a guy like Al Horford, who's a weapon and a shooter. Obviously, Derek White is improving offensively as well. I think Jrue has to do, well, or will be allowed to do less offensively. He will just be able to sort of fit into a role sort of like what Marcus Smart was for this team, a connector, a guy who can kind of draw to and kick it out. He's a guy who can create for others. He's a guy who can get downhill. He's a guy who can obviously defend at a very, very high level. Ultimately, I think Jrue is being put in place of what Marcus Smart did for this team. And I also think that ultimately it kind of makes more sense for him to be in that type of role versus the role that he played in Milwaukee for the Bucks. I think that's why this trade is going to look really, really good for Boston, because Jrue is probably more suited to play this type of role, and now he can absolutely thrive in it. With Derek White and Jrue Holiday and then on top of that, Kristaps Porzingis and Al Horford, you can already see the different types of pick and roll schemes defensively that they can throw out there. They can play drop, they can play a deeper drop with Porzingis and Horford, or they can, because of the versatility of Porzingis and Horford, they can maybe bring them a little bit closer to the level of the screen. Maybe even at times they can switch out onto the screen. I think Porzingis can do that a little bit, and Horford can do that. We'll talk about the Porzingis side of this in our full Celtics preview that I'm going to do in a couple of minutes. But when it comes to the Holiday trade, you can't help but like it defensively, and I think because he's going to be asked to do less offensively, it'll look much better. That being said, how this team looks now that they've lost 3 key rotation pieces is going to be a big question, and that's how it relates to the Kristaps Porzingis of it all. Ultimately, they are relying on 6 players, right? The 5 that I mentioned plus Porzingis. You have Jrue Holiday, Derek White, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Al Horford, and Kristaps Porzingis. That is 6 guys you can rely on pretty consistently. We'll get to Porzingis and the health issues in a second, but for this part of the conversation, let's assume you can rely on 6 guys. We just saw the Nuggets win a title with 7.5-ish players in their rotation. If we are counting Christian Brown, it was about 8 players that they played into their rotation, with Bruce Brown and Jeff Green being the main guys off the bench for them. You don't necessarily need depth, you need versatility. And I think the Boston Celtics can accomplish that. They can go extra big with Horford and Porzingis in lineups. They can go extra small by starting only one of those 2 guys and then having Jrue Holiday and Derek White together. They can be an incredible nucleus defensively. Either way, they're going to look great for it. And they can even try to go extra small by, if they want to do this super small ball lineup, if they ever end up facing the Suns in the finals, if they want to draw out Nurkic, etc., they can even go Tatum at the 5. I know it's crazy, but it's an experimental lineup that you could potentially see working. Unfortunately, a lot of this hinges on Porzingis. And look, I think idealistically, right? If we're looking at Porzingis, who he is as a player, he's a guy who can stretch the floor for you. He can score at a great rate. Next to Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, he's going to get a lot of open shots. He's going to get a lot of opportunities to punish mismatches. And ultimately, I think he has the ability to punish those mismatches. That being said, I don't think he's going to punish them in the conventional way that Celtics fans are thinking. I don't think he's going to be, I get a switch onto a guard in the post, I'm going to back him down and then dunk on him. That's just not Porzingis' game. That's not what he's going to do. What Porzingis will do is, I have a guard on me in the post. Let me turn around. He can't contest my shot, and let me shoot it over him. That mid-range game is something that he's incredible at. He's potent in that area as well. You can see the actions that they can run to kind of get Porzingis open offensively. And in theory, it could work on the offensive end. The one question I have offensively is the style that the Celtics are doubling down on. We saw last year how important the 3-ball was for them. If they were making their threes, if they were knocking down their shots, nobody could beat the Boston Celtics. Not one team, okay? And even in the playoffs, that was the case. But there were games where they were missing their threes, where they relied, to be honest, too heavily on their threes, and it made them lose. That was one of the main reasons they lost. They tried to win the math battle way too often, and that was the style that Joe Mazzulla was incorporating for Boston all year. They wanted to emphasize 3-pointers, playing at a high pace, etc., etc. And look, that makes for great regular season basketball. It works really, really well in the regular season. I would not be surprised if the Celtics team wins 60 games this year because of it. They're going to dominate. But when it comes to the playoffs, having one certain offensive scheme makes it so that you're not going to be as versatile on the other ends. And I think Porzingis sort of doubles down on that. It makes them a little bit more one-dimensional offensively, in my opinion, unless we see Porzingis be a guy who can punish mismatches, a guy who can cook in the post, a guy who can really, really activate them in a different way offensively. It puts more of an onus on Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown to get downhill, to attack the basket, to be those guys to put pressure on the rim, because Porzingis isn't really doing that for you. He is going to do it just by the virtue of being 7'2", but he's more of a guy who's going to stretch the floor for you. He's doubling down on that whole 3-point ideology that the Celtics had last season. how does that work in the playoffs when teams are going to be, chasing you off of the line, forcing you to take mid-range shots, forcing you to get downhill, et cetera, like we saw the Miami Heat do? I'm sort of curious to see how it looks. That's the only question I have offensively with Porzingis. But defensively, idealistically, it makes a lot of sense. He can play drop. He's a great rim protector, a guy who can contest shots and block shots, et cetera. He's a guy who can switch out a little bit onto other guys just because he's good at using his frame and his length to be able to do that. Ultimately, you don't want him to do that all the time, but it gives you some versatility to try those things. And because Horford is so adept, Horford is so good at switching out onto guards. He's so good at playing that switch heavy style that you can be a little bit less conservative with your defense with Porzingis because he's such a good rover and rim protector on the other side. If Horford is playing such an aggressive style, then you have Porzingis as the backline guy, and wow, that makes for a really, really fun defensive tandem. And now you have, Derek White and Jrue Holiday adding that to the mix. Boy, this team is going to be really, really good defensively. I am really excited to see how they look on that end. But the question here is, and this is the big factor for all of this season, you are relying on Kristaps Porzingis. Let me tell you how many games Kristaps Porzingis has played over the last 4 seasons. 57, 43, 51, 65. Last year in Washington, he played 65 games. That was the most he's played since his second year in the league. It's huge. You haven't got a 70 you haven't got a season where he's played 70 plus games since his rookie year. So I just want to put that into perspective for Celtics fans. His health is going to be so important to this team, especially because now you don't have Rob Williams. You don't have that sort of assurance, if you will. And I know how Rob has been dealing with his injuries as well. He's not necessarily the healthiest guy either, but ultimately you're relying on Porzingis to be your main guy. He's already dealing with knee issues. He sat out for Latvia at the FIBA World Cup to make sure that he's ready for the Celtics season. And ultimately, relying on a guy who hasn't been necessarily healthy and durable throughout his career, it's a big question mark. And you were relying on that to be the make or break of this championship-worthy season. They have a championship-level roster. In that, there's no question. When you add Jrue Holiday to the mix, they have a championship-level defense. But it's about making this guy be healthy. Are they going to maybe bring him along slowly a little bit? Maybe they limit his minutes in the regular season so that he's ready for the playoffs. Maybe. We'll see. I'm not sure. But at the same time, it's a valid concern because he really hasn't been the most healthy and durable guy. And now I'm starting to think about how this depth looks if Porzingis gets hurt. And that's a big question. In general, when you look at their depth, you're asking guys like Peyton Pritchard, Lamar Stevens, O'Shea Brissett, Sam Hauser, Luke Cornett to be those guys to make the rest of this rotation. Sam Hauser was really good for them last year. He stretched the floor. He's a big body. A guy who, I'm not going to say he's a defensive stopper, but you're not going to be losing out too much if you play him defensively, especially with how much good defenders the Celtics have in that starting five. Hauser is a guy who can play minutes for them. I'm curious to see if he can play playoff minutes for them as well. That's going to be a huge question. Cornett is a little bit more of a question. I'm not sure if he's a guy who's going to be playing, big time playoff minutes. He's now their backup big if they start big with Porzingis and Horford. And I'm just not sure if that's the right way to go. Although I will say the Celtics have multiple first round picks. They have, I believe, 8 second round picks that they can use at the trade deadline to maybe go out and get another big man just to back someone up. Raptors fans will think of Chris Boucher as a guy. And I think, adding Boucher to this team would be really, really good. He would fit into their style almost perfectly. He's a guy who can stretch the floor for them, block shots, et cetera. He would work perfectly on this team. But that's the type of guy that they can go out and try to get, right? They have multiple second round picks. They have the salary matching is a little bit difficult on that end, but ultimately you can go out and get another pick. I also think they have a trade exception that they can use as well to potentially, for matching salary purposes, use in the event they go out and get someone at the deadline for a backup big. I think that's something they absolutely have to address. But then the other side of it is okay, how many minutes is Peyton Pritchard going to give you in the playoffs? He's a defensive liability. I believe in him more offensively. I think he can play a role offensively for them. And as I was mentioning in that small ball 5 unit, maybe he's that 5th guy. But I don't know. I'm kind of curious to see if Pritchard is a guy who maybe gets moved, maybe gets traded to reassure them at the backup big, right? That kind of makes sense to me. He's one of their younger guys. Maybe a younger team takes a swing on him and, goes for it. I actually think Boucher, Pritchard, I'm not going to go into the Raptors side of this too much, but I think ultimately that makes a lot of sense. How much you're going to be able to get from Lamar Stevens and Oshae Brissett as your wing guys is also a question. Brissett is a guy who in the past has been able to shoot the ball. He's a big body. He's a good rebounder. He's athletic. He can kind of get downhill for you at times, punch a gap, attack a closeout, etc., etc. Those are the things Oshae Brissett can do. And I'm kind of curious to see if he's going to be maybe their 7th guy in this rotation. If he does that, that would be huge for his playoff career. Stevens, on the other hand, is not the shooter that Brissett is. He wasn't a great shooter for Cleveland last year, but he was a good complementary piece. He fit really well with them. He played good defense. He was a big body, etc., etc. And I think he could play a pretty important part for them as well. Ultimately, you're asking these type of guys to fill out the back end of this rotation. But I do think that the top end talent is so good that it might not matter. When we think about depth, right? A lot of people say, oh, you need depth to be in the playoffs. You need depth to be good in the playoffs. And I think people mistake depth for versatility, because you need to be versatile to win in the playoffs and win a championship. You don't necessarily need depth. We look at the Nuggets last season. Again, they played 6, 7, maybe 8 guys throughout their playoff run. It wasn't because they were deep. It was because they were versatile. It was because Jeff Green gave them a different look. It was because Bruce Brown gave them an extra ball handler. Christian Brown could really fill and punch gaps and kind of be this rover type that Bruce Brown also was for them. I think ultimately they were able to do unique things because of their players. And I think the Celtics can achieve that as well. Again, they can go extra big and start Kristaps Porzingis and Al Horford together. They can go smaller and start Drew Holiday and Derek White together. And I'm kind of curious to see who comes off the bench. Are they going to be bringing Horford off the bench? Is it going to be Porzingis, Tatum, Brown, Smart, White? Or is it going to be double big and then they go from there? A question for Joe Mazzulla, but regardless, they have the versatility. They have the ability to do that. The main questions, if I had to think of 3 questions for the Celtics this season, is 1, how healthy Kristaps Porzingis will be. 2, how much versatility are we going to see on the offensive end, and that 3-point shot, how much are they going to rely on it? And number 3, are they going to go out and try to get something else? Maybe a backup big man, maybe another, wing type that can maybe be a big 5, etc., etc. Can they go out and do that? Those are the 3 main questions I have for the Celtics this season. But regardless, the pressure is on. They have acquired Drew Holiday. They have acquired Kristaps Porzingis. And if you think about their summer, losing Marcus Smart and Rob Williams hurts. I know. If you're a Celtics fan watching this, it probably really hurts you, the fact that you've lost 2 guys who were, heart and souls, fan favorites of that Celtics team. And ultimately, it's going to be tough to see those guys go. And look, you lost the 6th man of the year in Malcolm Brogdon as well. But at the same time, talent-wise, you've improved. Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis are no doubt better players than Marcus Smart and Time Lord. And I think that is the thing you can kind of hang your hat on. You've got more talented, you've got more versatile, and ultimately, this is the year where I think the Celtics win the championship. You look back at NBA history, and there are teams that get over the hump, and there are teams that don't. And this is the season where we see if the Celtics are the team that does get over the hump, or they don't. They fall flat on their face, and then there's decisions that have to be made about Tatum, Brown, etc., and what happens there. But that's a question for next summer. If they fail, if they don't make it to the finals, if they don't win an NBA championship. But the expectation here should be to win a championship. And ultimately, when you look at the Eastern Conference, other than Milwaukee, who obviously is out of Damian Lillard, it's a big deal. I think the Boston Celtics are in a really good position too. And I think they're in a position to win a championship. But the pressure is on, folks. There's no question about that. The Celtics have a lot of pressure on them. The Bucks have a lot of pressure on them to win now. When you go all in, you have this sense of pressure to compete and kind of win a championship now. And ultimately, I got to tip my hat to Brad Stevens and the Celtics. I got to tip my hat to John Horst and the Bucks because they went for it. When you have the talent, when you have guys like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, when you have guys like Giannis Antetokounmpo, you have to go for it every single time. You have to give yourself a chance to win. If you think you have a chance to win, you have to double down on that. And the Celtics and Bucks did that. So I'm really happy when teams do that. And I think ultimately the Celtics are in a really good position to potentially win an NBA championship here. The pressure is on. There's no question about that. They're relying on health ultimately to do this, but I still think they have a good chance. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Celtics fans, rip me if you guys want to. Tell me you disagree. Tell me you agree. It doesn't matter. Regardless, we appreciate y'all tapping in. Thank you very much. Peace out.